This is a new and strange environment at first, suddenly finding yourself in orbit.
I'm Neville Andrew Mara, and this is Never Normal, a show about breaking free from the boring default plan and living life on your terms instead. My guest for this episode is Amanda Goetz. Amanda is the founder of House of Wise, a luxury CBD brand for women. She started the company on the side while she was still the VP of Marketing at The Knot Worldwide. Now Amanda is also the part-time Chief Marketing Officer for Teal, and she's got a very active following on Twitter. On top of all that, Amanda is a single mom with 3 young kids. Amanda Goetz, welcome to Never Normal.
Thanks for having me.
You were living in New York, working at The Knot. The thing that struck me is that for a while, like your Twitter bio was actually something like building the next thing in, and I think was it a moon emoji? Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
So you had this sort of pretty public role as a marketing executive within like a really big company. For anyone who doesn't know, The Knot is like basically if there's anything related to websites to weddings in the US and internationally now, like it's probably The Knot or some company that they've bought, right? They've acquired a ton of companies over the years. And so you're in this pretty public role, and yet you were also sort of publicly building a startup. How did that go over? Like, how did you tell them like I'm gonna start my own thing? Because that's really unusual.
Yes, so I definitely told them before I made any public acclamations about building again. I had been at the company for over 5 years and led kind of the brand repositioning and visual identity refresh, and we got acquired and merged with Wedding Wire to become The Knot Worldwide, and I'd been there for a while and had built the team, and I had an amazing team under me. And with anything, when you start to feel like you're not growing as fast, like growth is a big thing for me. Like I always want to feel like I'm doing something new. And in order for me to kind of keep that creative energy going, and that's very important for me, it was harder at a large company. Like we went from, a less than 800 person company, which is like middle size, still huge, but then over 2,000 person global company with a large team. And so when I first started, I had a lot of influence and impact over the brand and the company and the direction. And I got to help build like actual products under the Knot, digital app. And I had my hand in like a lot of cookie jars. And as the company grows, your ability to influence a lot of things becomes smaller because you have more to manage with under your umbrella. And so I had a very, very honest conversation with my boss, just being like, hey, I need to continue to scratch that kind of creative itch, but I want to make sure that as long as we're aligned on what goals I need to hit here, and that I continue to do my job and give my all when I'm here, just want to make sure that like we're cool with that. And they were very, very open and accepting of that, because I just don't believe that passion is a zero-sum game. Like when I had my first kid and then I had my second kid, it didn't mean I loved my first kid any less, right? And so I think we're entering this new wave, and COVID kind of helped us push into that, where time is just this societal construct of like the 9 to 5. And now companies are realizing that they need to be more focused on operational excellence and outcomes versus output. And I think the Knot is kind of on the forward edge of thinking that way, and so it allowed me the opportunity. And this is House of Wise came out of something that I was just very passionate about. And I couldn't stop thinking about it, that there was this massive stigma around cannabis for women like me who are moms, executives, like trying to quote unquote, like have it all. And we are realizing as a generation and as a society that you can't have it all without having help. And so help comes in many forms. And, there's very privileged versions of help. And then there's, less privileged versions of help via community and cannabis and things like that. And so it was just something I was very, very deeply convicted on. And as long as we had kind of aligned kind of parameters around what that looked like, that was very important.
So you mentioned a few things there I want to come back to. The most importantly, what you're doing now. But before we kind of dive deeper into that, I guess the reason why, like, your Twitter bio probably seems like a weird place to start, but the reason I bring it up is just because, well, I have a saying that you probably have more options than you realize. And I think this is true for all of us, even for me, as I say it, right? And that's part of the reason why, so many of us have like coaches or businesses use consultants, because a lot of times it's good just to have that someone else to look at a situation and point out maybe a path that you didn't see. And I talk to a lot of people who want to start businesses, who are interested or have like a project that they're passionate about. And it always seems like there's this sort of, this choice, this difficult choice between like staying on the career path, which obviously has certain benefits, staying in a big company, you have literal benefits like in the HR sense, but just like a sense of security and all of that. And then going and doing your own thing, which is obviously rewarding in its way, but it's scary for a lot of people. And so one of the things I wanted to point out is just this idea that like you didn't just like, what are the metaphors, like burn your bridges or boats or whatever things you're supposed to burn, right? Like you had this kind of phase transition where on the one hand you still had the corporate job, you still had the benefits that come with that, you were building something on the side, which is what I think most people do if they're smart about it. But I've never heard anyone else actually frame it that way, as in like, this is my day job and I've got this other thing going on, and you're sort of building in public while an employee. And now since you've left the knot, so you started House of Wise. Let's talk about that. I mean, you alluded to it just now, but for those listening who don't know, and we'll certainly include some links and I'll talk about it in the intro, but tell us more. What is House of Wise?
Yeah, well, I want to just comment on one of the things you just said though. Like there are different tiers of what building something on the side like looks like. And what I think that because I was building like a brand and a D2C company, like it was different. Many executives at big companies sit on boards for other companies and get paid for it, and they can talk about those companies. And then you have like junior team members who might have like little side hustles or, have a blog or a newsletter. I found myself in this like middle management area that like had more stigma around it. But really, I was doing the same thing that other people do, but in a different lens. And I love how you said, like, you don't know all your options. Like, coming from the Midwest, and I was raised in a very, very, quote unquote, kind of traditional house where dad worked, mom stayed home. I was really raised to think that like identity comes from marriage and all of this stuff. And I got married when I was 19. And so I agree that the biggest thing that I've learned since, I hit my 30s has truly been that there is like no preconceived way of doing things anymore. And as long as you lean into your conviction on everything of why it's the right thing for you and you hold those boundaries, like even fundraising for House of Wise, and I will get to your question, I promise. But even fundraising for House of Wise, while having a part-time CMO role, many people said no to me. They were like, no, you have to be all in. But like for me, as a single mom with 3 kids, I can't do that. Like that is just not feasible at this moment in my life. but I know I'm going to build a great company because I know women need this. And so I only want people who believe that I can do that, and they believe in me, and they believe in why I have to do it the way I'm doing it, and they're empathetic to that. Anyone who's not empathetic to the reasoning behind why I have to have a part-time job while I build a company in public, I don't want them on my journey because they don't understand like my life. And so I just like, there's no one way to do things, and you're going to run into a million people who will tell you that's false. But when you find the person that believes in you and understands your kind of new path, it only takes one person, right? And then that kind of gives you the validation. But okay, so now to answer your question, what is House of Wise? So House of Wise is helping women to take control of their sleep, sex, stress, and wealth through community, content, and CBD. That's our commerce angle, but we create high-end CBD products around those three verticals: sleep, sex, stress. And our distribution strategy is through micro affiliates, which we call our Wise Women. So as a marketer, like there's new wave of a micro influencer, meaning someone who's not this like 100,000 followers on Instagram and can push a lot of product, but instead you focus on someone who maybe only has 1,000 people or 500 people, but they genuinely like the product and they want to share it with their friends and family. And so we created this notion of a wise woman, and that's our distribution strategy right now.
I love it. And there's again a few things that you mentioned in there that I think are really interesting to explore. But just the strategy that you're using, I mean, it almost sounds a little bit like the kind of, I guess what is it, Mary Kay, and like what are the original sort of brands like that? I mean, it's a very proven strategy, but it's one that almost feels like kind of shunned by, like we've got a lot of these sort of big DTC e-commerce brands, and like, I don't want to say MLM because it's like such a dirty word, but I think there is something to that you're talking about of like, and probably I mean, I'm going on a limb here, but it's probably especially among women where because you've sort of niched down to like a particular gender. I mean, it's not a tiny niche, right? It's just, cutting out some people, but there is a sense of like, these people understand me more when you're getting a recommendation from someone personally. So you mentioned a micro-influencer, right? So it's not, Michael Jordan selling shoes, but it's like maybe your friend or somebody, who has a few hundred or maybe a few thousand followers, I'm guessing, who's recommending a product that they use. Is that the idea?
Yeah. Well, it stemmed from the fact that I had never touched cannabis in my life. Like I've been an athlete my whole life. I'm a former ACE certified personal trainer and group fitness instructor. And it was only when I was going through a divorce and I had 3 kids under the age of 4 and at kind of the height of my career that therapy wasn't enough. Like my anxiety and situational depression was like a thing, and the physical symptoms were affecting me. And I found myself like drinking more alcohol than I had ever had in my entire life to try to cope with those kind of physical symptoms and needing to like come down at the end of the day. And it wasn't until I started to like research cannabis, understand that this is like plant-based, what are the kind of medicinal properties of this plant and what has it been used for, etc., and really just like dove into the research. But then when I was like, there's still a stigma around it, like I'm scared to tell my mom friends that instead of having my 2-3 glasses of wine last night, I microdosed THC, and yet I felt scared to tell people that. And so what happened was, as I became more confident and I saw how my life was getting better, like I was sleeping better, my workouts were coming back because I wasn't so groggy the next day, and I saw that this was impacting my life in a very, very positive way, that I felt now validated in talking about this to people. But this category is ripe with so much misinformation and education and bad products, to be honest, that I think it's less about seeing an opportunity to build the next Mary Kay and more about the fact that that is genuinely how I talk to people about my experience. And I wanted to build a company that allowed women an avenue to learn about the product in a way that they would trust it, because we are now inundated with social ads. And I don't believe that women are going to trust a social ad for a product that you you are ingesting that will inherently affect you.
Yeah, especially when it's just related to drugs. I mean, I understand the differences, but there's that stigma.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then, yes, to answer your question about MLMs, and there is such a stigma around MLMs, and rightfully so. So I'm from the Midwest, where I have a lot of friends that sell, you name it, and your Facebook feed is full of it. And so I studied MLM mechanics in these companies for a while to understand, and I talked to my friends. I was like, why were you attracted to this? And a lot of it has to do with, one, the generational and societal relationship with women and money. And a lot of people would respond with I want to have money that I control and only I touch, and it's mine, and my husband or my partner doesn't have access to it. So to me, that led me to this larger mission. And that's why my mission statement is around sleep, sex, stress, and wealth. Because as women do make money from House of Wise by talking to their friends about it and having an affiliate link, we also add layers of education around financial literacy. Like the other night, we did a Bitcoin 101 session. So women, if they made $100 selling House of Wise to their friends and giving them better sleep, they now understand how to create a Coinbase account and what is Bitcoin and why is it important to think about it as a part of your portfolio. And so I think that they're MLMs, why do they have the stigma? Well, one is called multi-level, meaning it's a pyramid. The person on top makes the most money, and then they have to recruit people under to get more money. And then the people at the bottom are making a small percentage. That is a horrible mechanic. And I completely stripped all of that away. There's no recruiting. There's no joining a team. Wise women are all wise women. They all have an affiliate link. They all have the same percentage, and they can choose to sell or not. They get the same benefits no matter how much they sell. They get to be a part of our Slack group. They get to join hangouts with me where I go behind the scenes and talk about what it's like to build a company. We do these Bitcoin 101 sessions. We have a sex expert coming to talk about how COVID has affected your sex life. All of these things are part of just being a part of this community. And if you love the product and you want to tell people about it, great. But so I think that you're right. MLMs have really, really predatory parts to them, and we are stripping those. And that's why I don't even view it as an MLM. I view it as community-based distribution.
Yeah, and I think you've almost sort of reinvented the model in a much better, healthier way. Going back to your own experience, going through a divorce, living in New York, as you said, at the height of your career, I can only imagine the stress levels. I mean, add in the kids, who I'm sure are wonderful, but at the same time, we all know, a lot of stress. There's a few things there. First of all, it seems to me like you're sort of scratching your own itch, as we say in business, right? Where you didn't sit down one day and say, well, Bitcoin is cool and mobile apps are hot and I want to start, a new business. So, I'll go make a mobile app for trading Bitcoin because that seems like a good opportunity. You started from a place where you had a need, and it seems like that was maybe a little bit unmet, just in terms of knowing that you were getting a good quality product that was out there and all of that. So at what point did you go from sort of CBD user to thinking I should start a product in this space? Because that's a pretty big leap, and it's a huge mission that you're taking on, right? I mean, this is not a simple product to create or to market, as I'm sure you've run into, or to even open a bank account. Don't
get me started on the bank account stuff. I picked the hardest thing to literally start a company on, cannabis, MLM, stigma in the middle of COVID, is the perfect storm. My entire career, I only work on things where I directly feel passionate about and feel connected to the end user. So working at the Knot for 5.5 years, prior to the Knot, I actually worked for a celebrity wedding planner managing his brand, but I planned over 150 weddings. So going to the Knot, I knew the couple's pain points because I've planned 150 weddings. I know what it's like to plan a wedding and all the problems you're going to run into and the emotions you're going to. So I can only work on things. And even with Teal, the fact that Teal is helping people realize that your career is really career health actually affects mental health. And so meditation isn't going to help if you have a shitty job. Like, you need to figure out what makes you happy and the thing that you spend 60% of your life doing. And so I can't work on something unless I'm very, very passionate about it and feel connected to the person who I'm marketing towards. So it's definitely mission driven for me, which every single time I see a testimonial from a woman who's like, she had her, like, we have women that are like, I had my first like G-spot orgasm, or, you know, I haven't slept in 6 months throughout the night because of the anxiety of the pandemic. And this was the first 8 hours sleep I got. Like, those are the things that keep me going, because this may be a big company. This may only be, you know, a small company, but at the end of the day, the fact that I'm helping real women in their everyday lives, like, that keeps me going.
Yeah, and I think doing something that you care about is the ultimate, like, you know, way to have fulfillment in your career. Forget the money, forget everything else, because none of us are smart enough to know, right? None of us know which thing is going to take off or if it's going to be successful. Obviously, you know, you go into it as an optimist, or you would never start it. You believe in the potential of the business, or you wouldn't waste time on it. But ultimately, if you're going to survive those, you know, inevitable downturns, right? Anything you do is going to be hard. And I'm sure, I mean, we made kind of a joke about how difficult it is to bank in that space. I mean, I worked with a startup, it was a legal news publisher, and we would run news stories about like cannabis law changes, right? So like, I don't know, Michigan passed a bill or something. And even promoting posts that were linking to news articles, Facebook would take them down because they were like violating their cannabis standards. And there was like no product for sale. We weren't advocating anything. And so it's a very difficult business. And I imagine to get through all of that and to just like have the energy to go forward, you have to believe in what, and I think that's true for every business, for everyone listening, that like you have to do something that you would be doing regardless, like something that you care about. But going back to, you know, that moment when you started this, I'm still kind of just stuck on this idea that like you're in New York, you know, you've already sort of made it in the sense of, you know, Midwest girl, small town, sort of blue collar beginnings, amazing job. I think a lot of women would say that's their dream job. I don't know if they actually dealt with the reality of how stressful I'm sure it was, if they would still say that. But on the surface, like from the outside, you know, you're working for this like amazing wedding company. You are married at the time. You have 3 little kids. You've got this sort of like picture perfect life on the outside. You go through a divorce. I think most people's reaction would be to sort of like curl up a little bit and stick with something that feels very safe. And I don't know the timeline of all of these events, but if we can dig into that a little bit, I would just love to know sort of like, what was the self-talk? Like, how are you, you know, telling yourself, I understand the idea, like, you know, you're working at the Knot and it's become sort of like operational in a sense of like, you know, you're just kind of keeping the thing going as opposed to like starting the brand new cool adventure. But just like, yeah, what was going on in your mind when it comes to this idea of like, I'm going to start a new venture, even though, you know, I'm a single mom with 3 kids. You should be getting like a government paycheck from like the post office where they're never going to fire you according to like conventional wisdom, right?
So it stems from a lot of just shadow work of understanding what my subconscious had been leading me to think and do over many years. And with that shadow work came a lot of just like freedom, just in my own sense of self, of I am rediscovering who I actually am, you know. And so what do I mean by that? So a lot of my 20s was me having a checklist of things that I thought I was supposed to have in this life. And my tunnel vision was to go hit those items, get married, have kids, get the dream job. In my 30s, and a lot of this has just been a lot of analytical therapy work, is realizing that those are not what define me. And I am so much more than just a mom and just a worker and just, you know, someone's wife. And what happened was stripping myself of like some of those idols and identities allowed me space to explore who I really am. And I mean, I still sit here today, kind of 5 years into that journey, excited because I think I'm just still at the tip of the iceberg of discovering who I am as a human. But the freedom in that exploration over this past couple of years has been so incredible that it allows me less fear to explore these new things. And I know that sounds crazy because, like, you're right. Getting a divorce and having 3 kids, you would think I would want to cling to stability. But when you're stripped of all stability, you kind of are like fearless. I don't know how to fully articulate it, but I'm in this chapter of life where it's almost karmatic, where I'm using I believe intuition is just our subconscious AI, right? Like, we have so many data points that we've ingested over the years that intuition, I think, is part of our like kind of central processing system, right?
Which is, I think that's scientifically true, by the way. I mean, I get that you're making an analogy, and I'm curious to hear where this goes, but I think what you're saying is more or less validated, this like system 1 and system 2 and all that stuff.
Yes, exactly. I'm just not that well read and don't know but yes. Okay. So I'm really into leaning into that intuition and saying, right now, this feels right. I feel like building this company feels exactly where I'm meant to be at this point. And how I got to, I know you asked this question, I have not answered it directly, but like, what was that point where I actually said, I'm going to go build a company? There's this like children's book called What Do You Do with an Idea? And it's literally the best analogy for what my experience was. It's about this like little boy who gets an idea, and the idea looks like a little egg, and he wants to ignore it because he's embarrassed that he has this egg that's following him everywhere. And so he's embarrassed by this idea, and he doesn't give it any attention, but it still follows him around everywhere. And then he gives it a little attention and it gets a little bigger, and then he gives it a little bit more attention and it starts to like turn into this like beautiful creature, and then it like changes the world and brings colors to the town and all this stuff. So anyway, long story short, I started using cannabis, realized it helped me, gave it a little attention, realized that more women could benefit from this, gave it a little bit more attention, started to talk to people, got connected to people, gave it more attention, found the most amazing hemp farmer in Denver and incredible humans, and met a team of chemists that would help me formulate these products. And it just kept building on itself so naturally that I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I had to just give it all like more of my attention. And so there came a point where it felt like the right moment to step away and give it more of my attention. And it felt right at the time. Like, there wasn't any like sign that I was waiting for that I was like, okay, I need to have this much in my bank account and this much, going in the business, or these milestones. Like, I kind of just was like, now's the time I'm ready to kind of put more of my headspace on it.
Yeah, I think there's also just something to be said for, as you said, following your intuition and just kind of like opening yourself to those possibilities, right? When you're no longer just living on that like checklist life of like, I've got to do all these things, then other things start to show up. And maybe they're showing up regularly, but most of us just don't see them because we're just so like hell-bent, blinders on, going towards some life that was sort of like pre-set out for us, or what we think we should be doing, or what our parents think we should be doing, or any of those kind of things. And I think we're all guilty of that. Were there any particular, I mean, it sounds like you've done a lot of sort of like self-development work, and now I'm just asking for selfish reasons because I'm into all that kind of stuff myself. Were there any particular activities or methods, or was plant medicine, therapists, was there anything in particular that helped you sort of like most to kind of shed that initial identity and open yourself and connect with your own intuition?
So first and foremost, it was just finding the right therapist who I could meet with twice a week and really take that seriously and come to those sessions. Like, many people, if they're like, okay, I need a therapist, I'm just going to go check the box, like do my therapy work, I talk about surface level things. But if you only talk about like, oh, I had this weird conversation with a friend, or my boss did this, and you don't get into like, the real shadow work which is your childhood and why you have triggers the way that you have triggers, and making those triggers conscious, and your relationship with each of your parents. And I think people are scared to tap into it because they're scared that it denotes that there was something wrong with their childhood or wrong with their parents. And if we could strip away those two things and say, it doesn't matter what kind of childhood you had. You could have the best textbook childhood, but maybe there was weird interactions or something happened that like created your stuff. And I think people are worried to dive into that stuff because they feel like it's taking away their gratitude of their childhood. Like, I am so gracious. My parents, given what they grew up with, both my mom was one of 11 kids. And my dad was, kind of an orphan and lived out of his car for a chunk of his life before he started his plumbing business. Like, I am so thankful for how they were able to overcome what they overcame. But still, there is still generational stuff and cultural stuff that bleeds into your upbringing that if you don't unpack. And so lots of therapy, but it was that deeper therapy work. And then the second piece is when the first time I dated someone after my divorce, I found this app, which they just got acquired by Headspace, but it was called Lasting. And it is like this, it's kind of like the workout for a relationship, but it was all around self-discovery and then kind of mutual self-discovery under the confines of a relationship. And so it would ask questions like, how did your mom show you love? How did your dad show you love? And it would show so you did this work kind of in your own space, but then it would reveal the answers to the other person and then create questions based on that kind of to help you guys discover your love language. And so I think that there's kind of these textbook things like what are the love languages, etc. But that's very like one dimensional. It's like, you know what I mean? And so like, sure, you may say, I feel love when you give me gifts, but unless you actually dive into like, oh, I watched my dad, even though we had no money growing up, he would still run to the like drugstore and get my mom like a cappuccino and peanut M&Ms because he knew that she'd been alone all day and wanted to come home with something. And that is why, and so diving into the why behind things is what I constantly go after. And I'm insatiable on the why. And I think that that's what did it for me, is just constantly now being like, we all are the way we are. I am a very, weird blend of a human. And why? Like, why am I that way? And then that helps me to find things that pair nicely with that.
Yeah, the most, I didn't mean for this to be like a setup for that at all, but the most profound, I think, experience I've had in that kind of stuff was this childhood trauma exercise. And just saying the words childhood trauma to me would like send me out the door. I'm like, I don't have any childhood trauma. My parents are amazing. Like, I had a great childhood. I grew up in a wonderful neighborhood. Like, there was no war outside. Like, everything was great. And I still feel that way, don't get me wrong. But it's a heavy topic, so it scares people off, as you said. But doing that, but also I did it in sort of like a group setting where I saw a bunch of these grown men, and there are guys who are millionaires. One of them is a Super Bowl champion, people who are pretty connected in like Hollywood and have very successful startups, and like people who like are very successful, and then going back and like, peeling off all that identity stuff and going to their, and like reparenting their child selves and doing that type of work. I mean, it's way beyond the scope of what I think we have time for today, but like, I just encourage anyone listening to at least just like open yourself up to exploring that, because it sounds super woo-woo or like, it's only for people who've suffered some kind of abuse, but it's totally not. I mean, like, we're talking to you here, like super successful, founder, career woman, like what ticked all the boxes, whatever, and you're saying that like this was useful for you. So I'm happy to have you just sort of like, again, destigmatizing something that I also believe in. But again, that wasn't intended. I didn't know you'd done any of that kind of stuff. I was expecting you to say, oh yeah, I had this one really crazy trip. No, there's one thing that we've been sort of ignoring in all this, and that is Teal. So you didn't just leave your last job and start a startup, right? We talked about building in public and building sort of while you were still working there, but you also are let me see if I get this right, a part-time CMO for Teal, is that right?
Exactly.
So what's Teal, and how do you, because that seems like an ideal setup, right? You've got your startup you're working on, but you still have the security at least of like a part-time job. So how's that going? What's Teal? How could someone arrange something like that? Let's dig in.
So Teal is incredible. Like, the mission, again, is something that's near and dear to my heart because it's all about making kind of the subconscious conscious, which is kind of like the theme of what we've been talking about. But Teal helps people be in control of their careers, because every company has an HR department, but you don't have like your own kind of personal HR department that's helping think about where you're going in your career and why you're frustrated in your current role. And I think most people take their career and they make career decisions based on running from a pain versus running towards a goal or a need that was unmet in the last. And so I met Dave in the summer of last year. He asked me to come speak to their marketing cohort of people about marketing careers and what are the different paths, and also being a woman in marketing and, juggling kids with career, kind of all of those things. And it was just a magical conversation. Like, I saw the community knowing details about one another and being like, oh, so-and-so, when you were at this company, remember how you did this? And it was really cool how they were in it together. They were realizing that this journey of your career is really an ongoing relationship with yourself and what your needs are. And so I just started having a great conversation with Dave over the course of a couple of months. And this is about the same time as I started to build House of Wise in public. And I was giving it attention, and it was growing and growing. And at one point, Dave texted me and was like, hey, would you ever be interested in being an advisor for Teal? We really need to grow top of the funnel, really like double down on our brand, where they're about a year old, and their brand identity and strategy and kind of go-to-market stuff needs to really be refined. And he's like, would love to have you as an advisor. And kind of going back to our original point of like, there are no predetermined paths. I was like, hey, do you have a second to talk? And I was like, I am getting closer to needing to go more time, not just nights and weekends, on House of Wise. And in my head, I was like, okay, to make ends meet, I'm going to have to like take consulting jobs or whatever, because I'm a single mom and I have 3 kids. I am not a 27-year-old guy that has no like responsibilities. Like I can't work 80 hours a week, and I can't not have a salary. So I was like, rather than having me as an advisor, what if you had me 2.5 days a week and I actually like was in it with the team, like attending meetings. And now look, fractional executives are still a very new concept. And so what does it take for this to actually be successful? It takes a very, very ongoing, transparent, and honest evaluation conversation between me and Dave, the founder, and knowing that, like, in the beginning, I was managing the other marketers on the team. What we learned was that's actually not the best way, because people want a full-time. Their resentment can build. It wasn't, but we were just trying to stay ahead of what could happen. And so we learned that it's better for me to kind of still act as that kind of advisor consultant, but I'm in the team meetings and feeling like a part of the team and listening to the user research and being in the Slack community, etc. So it's been iterative. And, even now, like House of Wise launched, things are happening. It's needing a little bit more of my time. So I went from 2.5 days to 1.5 days right now. And we make very clear frameworks of like what is expected of me and what is the most impact I can have for Teal. And so it's just iterative, but I think it takes like a very different type of founder and also a very different type of employee to be able to have those honest and very like hard conversations about what each person needs. And there will come a day where I raise the next round of capital for House of Wise. House of Wise now needs a full-time CEO, or Teal is cranking and they need a full-time CMO. Whichever comes first, we are both prepared for that switch to happen. And I move into an advisor role for Teal, and I am still there supporting the mission and the brand and the company.
And I think it's an ideal setup for the reasons we described. Obviously, there are some potential pitfalls. It's also not something that I think probably most people consider, but I can't help but think that this option was available to you, and I mean this to be empowering for people listening, but I can't help but think that this option was available to you because you have a personal brand. And I think you have a strong personal brand. It's the reason we're having this conversation. I mean, if you had just spoken at some conference, I would have listened to you. And then, if you just posted some generic corporate, like, Q3 numbers are up every now and then on Twitter, I would have totally forgotten about you. And it's not only about me. I mean, obviously I've seen you interviewed other places. You've developed, as I said, like a great following on Twitter. And I think in a way, I'm sort of sitting here wondering, like, who's getting the better deal here? Because you're getting the ability to build your company, but there's some leverage sort of in the relationship, because they're getting, Teal's getting like Amanda's ideas and leadership and all this stuff, and not at, whatever, a full-time person, and still having that, additional sort of room in the headcount, especially because they're a relatively small company too, still starting up. And I know every day of an executive counts, right? So I think it's a non-traditional model. I don't know that it's, appropriate for every situation, as you said, but I think that's something that would be really cool to see more of. And again, to this idea that, like, we all have more options than we realize. It doesn't have to be black or white. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can do the Amanda approach. You can build a company while you're still at a full-time job, start another part-time job, keep cranking up your company, and then realize that, yeah, maybe those decisions aren't forever, but everybody's benefiting in the meantime. And I just think that's really amazing. I've mentioned it a few times, this personal brand that you have on Twitter. In the few minutes that we have left, I would love to sort of get your take on how you look at sort of building your own personal brand, because it seems to me that there's a lot of House of Wise these days, but it's more than that. You're not just House of Wise, and when you were at the Nod, it wasn't just that. And so sort of like what's the overall brand around all of this, and just how do you think about that? Like, how do all these pieces fit together in your mind?
Yeah, I wish I could sit here and be like, I was very intentional about building a personal brand, because if I had been, I would have started it years ago. But I got on Twitter, it's been a little over a year now, where I actively started tweeting and not just like post Instagram to Twitter type. It was more because I actually had preconceived notions of Twitter. I felt like it was male dominated. It was very divisive, where people just were coming in to argue, and that's not my like default, so to speak. But I kept hearing like these kind of tertiary conversations around Twitter helped me, grow my company or connect me with people. And access is one of my biggest limitations, because I'm from the Midwest. I wasn't raised, in a house that had any connections to anyone that can help me in my journey. And then I, was at a Big Ten college. I didn't go to Ivy League, and I had kids young. And so I don't have the time to go to networking events all the time. So access was my biggest issue. And Twitter feels like a level playing field, that when you put out quality content, you can engage with anyone. And so I honestly got on Twitter and just said, I'm going to give it a go. Like, literally, there was no real like intentionality, but I just was myself. Like, if we were to go to dinner, you would know more than you probably would ever want to know about me at the end of that dinner. And I would probably ask you deeper questions than, many people would feel comfortable on. And I would want to understand who you are as a human. And so I approached Twitter in the same way I approach all of my relationships. And I think because that was different than how other people approached Twitter, that allowed like its own sphere for me, or my own like lane. And I talk about marketing and how I think about building a brand strategy. And so I have marketers that follow me. But then I like talk about how hard it is to be a parent and a working parent, and what trade-offs I have, and what I've had to let go of, and where I need help, and all that stuff. And so I have that kind of group that follows me. And then there's people that are just there for kind of like my random conversations around, new social media, or building and being a founder, or fundraising, or cannabis, or whatever. And so I think the multi-dimensional aspect of my content allowed for more people to come. And I think that I would not be where I am today without Twitter. And I got invited to speak to Jack Dorsey and the executive team, which was an incredible experience, because they were like wanting to know how I did, what I did, but also like how can they cultivate that experience for more women. And so we talked through like tactical things. But for anybody listening, like, Twitter can be what you make it to be, and it's up to you to like find your own groups that work. And it's a two-way street. Like, if I approach Twitter as like, I'm just going to tweet at people, versus develop real relationships. And that was the best part. Like, my closest friends today, I didn't know 2 years ago. It's because of COVID and Twitter that, I mean, the amount of people that I now text with or are investors in my company and are there and they answer my calls when I'm going through something. It's just mind blowing that I didn't know them 2 years ago, but I met them through Twitter. And it's just because I was being like my full self. So I don't know if that's tactical, but that's just my like 2 cents.
I think it's your personality just to be open and to share what's going on. And we talked about sort of building in public. And I think that's just kind of, it sounds like a default for you, not something that you put on. And I think the internet in general rewards that. Social media rewards that, right? This idea of like talking directly to people and not, it's not here's the annual report that we've sort of polished for public consumption, but it's like, here's what's going on in my life. Yeah, Twitter.
I'm not polished. Let's just say that.
Twitter has this reputation that I hear from other people that it's such a toxic place. And maybe like political Twitter is that, or maybe I don't know, maybe as a guy I'm spared from that. I don't know. But for me, it's like the least toxic social network that I'm on because it's a bunch of people throwing ideas around. And that's not to say that nobody says anything mean or whatever, but it's not like, hey, look at my perfect life. It's not, let's argue about Trump. It's not any of that kind of stuff. And in some ways, and I'm certainly not the first one to say this, but like, I think Twitter is the real LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn for me is just a bunch of spam back and forth, but like you're connecting with actual investors and actual people who want to work with you or become customers or become wise women through your engagement on Twitter.
100%. You nailed it. Like if we say it all the time with Teal, like Twitter is the better networking job finder. Like, how do you build with the intentionality of finding your next job through Twitter? And many people do it. But I think the difference is, and why I think many people say it's a toxic environment, is being a consumer versus a creator is a very different mentality. If you're just scrolling, you're not actually engaging in the conversations, and it can easily become, those two are always talking about this, and you start to formulate narratives in your head. But the second you jump in, the whole thing changes for you, and you have a different paradigm of what this kind of Twitter landscape is, because you actually realize I have the capability of jumping into that conversation that those two people are having and injecting my thoughts. Many people, that is a massive barrier for them.
I feel like that's a microcosm of this whole episode and your whole life. Like, hey, I have the capability of jumping in. I'm just going to go jump in. I'm not going to wait for an invitation or for somebody to tell me like I'm allowed to. You have more options than you realize. Like, it just seems like we came full circle. So I think that's a perfect place to leave it. Where would you recommend? Is Twitter the place? Where would you recommend people go if they want to kind of follow you, keep up with you, with Teal, with House of Wise?
Yeah, Twitter is where you're getting most of my like thoughts. If you want more behind the scenes like of House of Wise, Instagram is a great place to find us. I'm at Goetz AM on Instagram, and then you can find House of Wise there. And if you want to buy from a wise woman, that's a great place to do it, and try the products. But yeah, that's where I am most of the time.
Awesome. And just so we'll make sure we link to all that in the show notes. And just last thing, really, really quickly, is becoming a wise woman something that's still open? Is that something people can do? Where should we send people to find more about that?
Yeah, if they go to houseofwise.co, they can learn more and sign up, and or just come to our Instagram and DM us. We are very active. We'll send you the link to sign up. But yeah, to be a wise woman is just to join our community of women who want to learn more about being in control of, your sleep, your sex, your stress, your wealth. It doesn't mean that you have to sell the products. You can just come for the community, stay for the great conversations. And then if you like the products and you want to tell your friends about it, you get a link and you make some money. So it's very low pressure, but we just want more women to be a part of it.
Amazing. As I said, we'll link to all of that. Amanda, thank you for being so generous with your time. I know you've got, 2 jobs, a company, 3 kids, and I'm sure a lot of other pressing priorities. So thank you again and for sharing so much.
Yeah, no, this was awesome.